Argath Prime Academy didn't look like a school so much as a cathedral to violence. The training hall alone was the size of a shuttle hangar, a vault of black stone and light-threaded steel. Polished floors reflected rows of weapons and the cold glare of observation panes. Where officers watched like hawks, gravity drifted a hair heavier than Earth's, a subtle tax that made newcomers clumsy and veterans efficient. Cadet Rhea Alvarez rolled her shoulders under the Academy issue cuirass, feeling the extra pull tug at her traps. The suit was a minimalist shell of memory fiber and reactive gel designed to distribute impact. It wasn't made for comfort. It was made to remind you of the price of a mistake. A bell chimed, a crisp, three-tone note that died fast in the giant space. The morning rotation spilled out across the floor, Karen phalanx moving in six-leg precision. Jelly-sheathed Lyrians practicing kinetic flow. A squad of Zrillion duelists blooming and closing their forearms like knives. Smells moved with them. Coolant from energy blades, antiseptic from medkits. Ozone from shield grids popping on and off. Humans were a rarity in these halls. Most arrived with stiff posture, overcompensating. Most left by the end of first term. The galaxy labeled Earth a death world and then, paradoxically, treated its people like glass. Rhea tugged her dark hair into a quick knot. The bands on her forearm warmed as they synced with the hall's training grid. Heartbeat and oxygen saturation pulsing a steady green. She could feel the throb of the place in her teeth, the deep, subsonic hum that ran through the Academy's foundation and put a thread of alertness in the spine. "You the mammal?" A voice rasped beside her. She turned. A Zrillion cadet towered over her, eyes a polished obsidian, scales the color of bruised cherries. He had a casual way of standing that put his bulk squarely in her space, like occupying it was a right. "I'm the cadet scheduled for slot 12, Rhea said evenly. "Fragile species," his mouth peeled in something not quite a smile. "I would offer you a pain blocker before you begin, but I'm not authorized to distribute narcotics to juveniles." Rhea let herself blink once, slow. "That's all right. I brought my own face." A snicker from his companions, a flicker of annoyance from him. "Good." The Academy taught 100 kinds of balance. The first was social. Everyone was always weighing everyone else. The bell chimed again. Instructors peeled off from the shadows like tigers stepping into sunlight. They came in shapes you could never forget. The insectal reach of a Hesper, the thin translucence of a crystalline overseer, the armored elegance of the reptilian line. And then him. VH, our single quotes SEK. He moved as if the hall existed to make him look good. Scales shot with faint crimson like old blood under polished glass. Crest swept back from a head ridged with battle scars. For hands, each with a thumb offset for grip and leverage. He wore his history with the standoffish pride of a career soldier. Campaign sigils etched into shoulder plates. A worn wrap at his left wrist where old bone had once failed and been regrown. His tail flicked once as he scanned the cadets, a metronome with teeth. "Cadet Alvarez." His voice carried without volume. "The cycle, you join the 100 Worlds cohort." "Sir," Rhea said, stepping forward. Murmurs skittered across the hall. "Human, Earth, Deathworlder." The words were never neutral. To some, Deathworlder meant hardy. To most, it meant volatile, barely civilized, unreliable in unit cohesion. Rhea had seen the briefings written by species who'd never set foot in the chemical sky over Sao Paulo during a heat surge. Versek S. Black eyes flicked over her armor like he was assessing. A tool for a job it couldn't do. Height, weight, planet of origin, 5'7", 62 Earth. Rhea said, "A death world." He said it like one might say storm drain. "Yes, Instructor." He let the word hang. "How many of your people have completed this program?" "A handful," Rhea admitted. "And how many returned to the line?" "One." She did not add that the one was a myth told in Earth circles. A Marine named Cato who'd supposed lie headbutted a Thal shock trooper into unconsciousness. Myths grew in the absence of respect. Versek's crest lifted a fraction. "You are aware that we do not structure our curriculum around your species." Improvisational ethos. Rhea knew the speech. She'd been given its cousins by police, by social workers, by an aunt who thought she should just take the safe job and stop trying to leave the neighborhood. She clasped her hands behind her back to keep them from betraying impatience. "I'll follow the curriculum, sir, for as long as you remain." He lifted his chin toward the sparring circle. "Enter." The circle's perimeter flickered, hard light rising waist-high like a ring rope. The inside Matt had give to it. Shock absorbed, but not too much. They wanted you to feel consequences. Rhea stepped in and felt the field recognize her, smoothing the microhairs along her arms. A lens irised open in the ceiling above, a quiet eye, round the ring. Cadets slowed their own drills to watch. Rhea caught flashes of faces. A Karen trooper with tusks carved with family glyphs. A Lyrian whose skin, beneath its jelly film, held nerves that let them feel motion in the air. A mix with a face like a wet orchid, beautiful in a way that bothered people who feared water. Overseer Thyre floated near the observation rail. Crystalline planes refracting the hall lights into a spray of soft spectrum colors. Thyre's voice cut through the whispers, neither male nor female, carrying the unforced authority of courts. Sparring Evaluation Protocol 8. Non-lethal. Instructor Versek to assess and correct. Non-lethal, echoed Versek, as if amused anyone needed the clarification. He stepped into the ring, and the field murmured again, recalibrating. Rhea met him at center. He offered his lower right hand. She realized too late it wasn't a gesture of respect, but a test of grip. She took it anyway. His scales were warm, the pressure immediate and calculated. She eased up instead of matching force for force. He withdrew that faint glint from his eyes. She watched him mark the data point. Human does not contest dominance ritual. Possibly submissive, possibly cautious stance, he said. She set her feet. The academy stance was a neutral base, knees soft, spine long. Rhea had learned a dozen stances: boxing, capoeira, close quarters police tactics from a retired cop who smelled of menthol and regret, a smattering of judo from a neighbor who ran an after-school program out of a church basement. The academy stance felt like none of them and all of them, a universal solvent, designed to dissolve bad habits. "Begin," Thyre said. "VH." Our single quotes SEK didn't move immediately. He watched her as if the match might be decided before any strike. The first minute, Rhea had learned, was often diagnosis. They looked for flinch patterns, for where you carried weight, for the tell in your eyes just before you committed. Rhea kept her breath steady. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The hall's smell shifted, a subtle metal tang that meant a medkit had been opened nearby. Good. It kept the panic at heel. Panic had a smell too. She had learned that in a crowded shelter during a heat surge when the power died, and the air went as sour as an old mouth. Versek shifted, weight on his back left foot, and feinted high with an outer hand. It wasn't a serious strike. It was an invitation for her to show him what she feared. Rhea didn't bite. She let the feint brush past and moved her own center half a step, minimal, economical. He nodded once, almost imperceptible. He liked minimal. Then he struck for real. It was the kind of motion that made you believe in inevitability, a step that ate distance, a twist that packed mass into an elbow the size of a hammer's head, a body that knew exactly where she would be 2 frames from now. His lower arm came in fast and tight, an arsing line meant to collide with the delicate bridge of mammalian bone. The academy had rules about targeting. Versek had not broken them. Face strikes were allowed on low-pulse induction fields. The programming ensured limited penetration. The impact still hurt and taught respect. Everything here hurt. That was part of the point. Rhea had time to do 3 things. She exhaled. She tried to roll with it. She failed to get far enough. The elbow connected with her nose. A bright, hot, white sound bloomed in her head. The world flashed, not black, but a stuttering overexposure, like someone opening all the shutters on a city block at once. Pain shot into her eyes and down into her upper teeth. Her hands went to the right places because she had drilled so long for the wrong thing to happen. She didn't scream. She couldn't. The shock stole her voice and replaced it with a chemical taste that meant blood. She stumbled back a half step and felt the mat give. The ring's light flickered under her boot, registering the displacement. Her visual field narrowed to a tunneled slit. Training tried to stand up inside the pain. Assess. Breathe. Orient. Warmth ran over her lips. slicking her philtrum and the bow of her mouth. She sniffed reflexively and learned again why that was a mistake. Another bolt of fire and the wet choke in the back of her throat. As blood threaded down her esophagus, the hall reacted, the way crowds react everywhere. A few gasps, a few winces, a few ugly laughs. The Zrillion who'd talked to her at the gate made a clicking sound that might have been satisfaction. Rhea tasted rust, thought of the old man to floors up who'd taught little kids to tuck their chins and keep their thumbs outside their fists, who'd said, "This world will hit you first to see if you fall down. Then it will hit you again to see if you stay down." She thought of holding her brother's hand through the summer night the ceiling fan died, and the city baked itself into a low-grade fever. Of her mother cracking ice with a hammer because the taps ran hot even on cold. Pain was information. That had been her father's line. Pain said there was damage to the vessel. Pain said, prioritize. Pain lied to, sometimes. It told you you were smaller than you were. Versek straightened out of the strike and let his hands fall to ready. He didn't follow. He wanted to see if she would fold. He wanted to see if a human bled and became docile like a herd animal. Rhea wiped her mouth with the heel of her glove. The smear came away blackish red against gray composite fabric. She could feel the break, not a clean snap, more like a crack along the crest. The nose was a bad design if you didn't know why it existed. Rhea knew. It warmed air. It housed smell. It broke easy so your skull didn't. Thayer's voice hovered from the periphery, cool and clinical. Medical team standing by. Unnecessary, Versek replied without looking away from Rhea. He tilted his head, mild contempt in the gesture. Pathetic. A single contact, and the mammal. He wanted to say cries. Rhea could see it in his mouth's shape. What Rhea saw even more clearly, the weight shift in his hips, the way his upper right hand had drifted away from his core in careless dominance, the slight slowness in his lower left, the wrist injury from an old campaign, wrapped and regrown, not quite what it used to be. She saw the spacing of his feet, the back one a thumb to straight, making his base stable against frontal impact, but vulnerable to a rotational torque. On an extended limb, those were facts. Facts were good. Facts cut through pain, her breath came ragged. Then sensed, 4 count in through the mouth this time. Blood taste be damned, 4 count hold. 4 count out. The academy stance was good for textbook exchanges. It did not account for a life where fists came from blind corners. And the ground could be broken glass. Rhea let her shoulders settle. She flexed her hands to reset the nerves. The tiny muscles in her forearms stopped buzzing. Memory rose through the pain like a diver breaking the surface. Not elegant, not sanctioned. Effective. The cadets along the rail leaned in as if a wind had pushed them. The hall seemed to narrow, the edges falling away, leaving only a bright ring and to hearts beating loud enough to hear. Versek's crest flared a fraction higher, misreading the settling of Rhea's posture for surrender. He took a step to finish his sentence. He never finished it. For the first time since stepping into the sparring circle, Rhea Alvarez felt the hum of the arena fall away. It wasn't gone. It was simply beneath her now. A bass note buried under the rising drumbeat in her chest. Everything sharpened, the faint ozone in the air, the rhythmic hiss of Versek's breath through scaled nostrils, the precise arc of fluorescent light glinting off the polished floor. Her nose throbbed with white-hot pulses that seemed to sync with her heartbeat. But pain was no longer the loudest thing in the room. Survival was. It was an old, feral rhythm, something that had lived in humans long before they built cities or crossed stars. The Deathworld instinct, the switch in Earth. No one ever taught Rhea how to fight. They taught her how to end fights. She remembered her mother's hands guiding her tiny fists against a heavy bag hung in the garage, saying, if you're going to swing, you swing once, and you make it count. She remembered the alley behind their building, where stray dogs roamed and men twice her size learned to step aside when she stopped backing away. That was the thing about humans. They didn't have claws or fangs, but they had focus. Once the body decided it must win, it turned into something else. VH or single quotes SEK didn't see the shift. He saw a wounded mammal, swaying slightly, blood painting her lip, a soft species from a gravity well to low, with bones to hollow and muscles to inefficient. So when he stepped forward, it was not with caution, but with disdain. Pitiful, he hissed, circling her. "This is why your species needs handlers, not comrades." He lunged a testing swipe of his upper left arm meant to push her back and show dominance. Rhea didn't retreat. She stepped in. The first strike was subtle at first. A slight angle of the shoulder, a low pivot of the hips. But to Versek, it was as if the human had teleported. One moment, she was bleeding and off balance. The next, she was inside his guard. Her forearm slammed into his wrist, redirecting the swipe harmlessly past her ear. He blinked. That was a close-quarters deflection, a technique used by elite close combat specialists, and a move humans weren't supposed to know. Before he could adjust, Rhea's knee drove upward. It didn't reach his chest plate. She was too short, but it did collide with the soft nerve cluster at the base of his lower ribs. The impact didn't drop him, but it forced the air from his lungs. His breath stuttered. His eyes widened. "First mistake," Rhea muttered, almost too quiet for him to hear. The Predator learned spectators' chatter died completely now. What had looked like a one-sided demonstration was shifting. Even the crystalline Overseer Thyre leaned forward, light refracting in new patterns across their facets. Versek roared and swung again, this time with real intent. A sweeping blow from his lower right arm aimed to crush her side. Rhea ducked under it, rotating her entire body with the motion, letting his momentum carry him past her. She hooked his elbow with both hands and dropped her weight. It wasn't strength. It was physics. Humans had been breaking larger creatures for millennia by exploiting angles and leverage. Rhea didn't fight his mass. She redirected it. Versek stumbled, off balance, and Rhea twisted hard. There was a sharp, wet crack. It took Versek a fraction of a second to realize it was his own bone. 30 seconds gasps rippled through the hall. The great Versek, decorated veteran of the Coronian Wars, champion of the Zorvath circuits, stood staring at an arm that now hung limp and useless at his side. The timer in the corner of the arena blinked. 30 seconds since he broke the human's nose. 30 seconds since he had called her pathetic. And now, he was the one stumbling backward. Jaw clenched, tendrils of pain shooting up through his nervous system. Rhea didn't press the attack. She didn't need to. She straightened slowly, wiping the blood from her upper lip with the back of her glove. Her chest rose and fell with steady, controlled breaths, the kind taught by medics and street fighters alike to keep oxygen flowing under pressure. Versek's tail lashed wildly. "You insolent, adapt or die," Rhea cut in. "That's what they told us back home." Deathworlder logic words carried more weight than he expected. They weren't a boast. They were a statement of fact. On Earth, adaptation wasn't a tactic. It was biology's only rule. A human in a corner didn't just panic. It evolved right there in the moment, turning pain into information and fear into strategy. And Rhea was textbook Deathworlder. VH, our single quotes SEK growled, chest heaving. "You think you've won because you got lucky?" "Luck," she tilted her head. "No, that was leverage. And you left your center line open." Something flickered across his reptilian face. Anger, yes. But beneath it, a crack of something rarer, respect. It was reluctant, buried under fury, but it was there. And that was when the Overseer's voice cut through the silence. "Continue," Thyre intoned. "The evaluation is not complete." The audience shift-skated, who had been laughing now leaned forward with narrowed eyes. The Karen Phalanx leader, a four-eyed brute who'd sneered at Rhea earlier, muttered something to his squadmates, something that sounded suspiciously like Deathworld tactics. Even the Zrillion who'd taunted her near the entrance was no longer smiling, because this wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a proof, a live demonstration of what humanity had always been, soft on the outside, terrifyingly adaptive underneath. And for the first time, the room wasn't looking at Rhea Alvarez as a weakling from a primitive world. They were looking at her like a predator. Versek raised his remaining three arms and circled once more, slower now, more deliberate. His arrogance had evaporated. His eyes, once bored, were sharp as knives. Again, he hissed. Rhea bent her knees, breath steady, blood drying on her lip. Gladly. The fight was far from over, but one truth had already been carved into the minds of everyone present. A Deathworlder might bleed, a Deathworlder might fall, but gods help you if they stand back up. And Rhea Alvarez was only just getting started. It wasn't the gravity, still slightly heavier than Earth, or the sterile training hall air, faintly tinged with disinfectant and plasma residue. It was the silence, the kind of silence that descends on predators when they finally realize the prey. Their stalking has teeth. Cadets who had been laughing minutes ago now stood perfectly still along the edges of the ring. Even Thyre, the crystalline overseer, had gone motionless, facets dimmed as though the light itself held its breath. At the center of it all, Rhea Alvarez and Versek circled each other like opposing planets drawn into collision. One bleeding, bruised, and breathing hard. The other, older, stronger, but with a useless arm dangling from his side and a new weariness in his eyes. The tables had turned, and everyone knew it. A warrior Recalibratesvark's nostrils flared as he pulled air deep into his powerful lungs, regulating his breath with deliberate precision. His crest flattened slightly against his skull, not a sign of fear, but of recalculation. Gone was the arrogance of his earlier taunts. In its place was the cold, analytical demeanor of a soldier who had underestimated his opponent and vowed not to do so again. Impressive, he rumbled. Crude, inelegant, but impressive. Rhea wiped her bloody lip with the back of her hand and smiled faintly. Crude works where I'm from. I believe you, he replied, eyes narrowing. But now, no more tests. He shifted his weight. The 3 remaining arms flexed, muscles rippling under scale. His tail, a weapon in its own right, swept low in slow, measured arcs. His stance was different now, tighter, centered, coiled like a compressed spring. Rhea felt the hairs rise on the back of her neck. This was no longer a sparring match. This was a predator sizing up another predator. The first assault strike came fast, faster than before. Versek used a ruined arm as a feint, flinching it forward just enough to trigger her instinct to block. Rhea bit the bait, lifting her guard, and that's when his tail whipped low and fast. It slammed into her thigh like a steel beam. Pain exploded through her leg, and she stumbled sideways, barely catching herself before hitting the mat, before she could recover. A follow-up blow came down in a hammering arc from his upper arm. Rhea rolled aside, but not fast enough. The strike grazed her shoulder, sending a shockwave down her spine. Better, she hissed, straightening up, leg trembling slightly. You're adapting, Versek said, circling again. Good, then you understand why your species will never conquer the stars. Rhea's brow furrowed. Because we're weak. No, his teeth bared in something that might have been a smile. Because you never know when to stop fighting. Deathworld lesson number 47. Never stop moving. It wasn't meant as a compliment, but Rhea took it as one. Her shoulder throbbed. Her leg burned. Blood still dripped steadily from her broken nose, leaving dark droplets on the pristine floor. And still, she advanced. Versek lunged, a flurry of sweeping strikes from 3 directions. Rhea blocked one, ducked another, absorbed the third with a twisting shoulder roll that sent pain lancing through her muscles, but kept her upright. She stepped inside his reach again, where his tail had less room to swing. And then she hit back. A tight elbow to his rib joint, a palm heel strike to the base of his jaw, a sudden, vicious headbutt that made the crowd gasp as bone met scale with a dull crack. Versek staggered back a step, eyes wide in shock. That wasn't in any academy manual. That was Earth fighting, dirty, desperate, and designed to end things quickly. She pressed her advantage, dropping low and slamming a kick into his shin joint. It wasn't enough to break it, but it was enough to make him grunt and falter. Still think I should stop fighting? She panted, circling him. He wiped a smear of blood from his lip, deep crimson against darker scales. No, now I think you're dangerous. The predator's gazette was subtle at first. A narrowing of his pupils, a shift in his posture. But Rhea felt it like a weight on her chest. Versek wasn't seeing a fragile human anymore. He wasn't seeing a cadet, or a rookie, or even an opponent. He was seeing a threat. Do you know what happens, he growled, when two predators meet? They fight, Rhea said simply. They kill. He lunged. The arena blurred. Versek's speed was monstrous, his bulk belying the predator's agility. Claws slashed past her face. A knee drove toward her gut. She parried, blocked, twisted, but still caught a glancing blow to the ribs that sent white-hot agony shooting through her side. She responded with a desperate counter. A hook to the jaw followed by a sweep that knocked his tail aside. He retaliated instantly, slamming his forehead into hers with bone-rattling force. Both fighters stumbled back, dazed and gasping. Neither fell. The cadets watching were silent now. The spectacle had become something more than training. It was primal, raw, elemental combat, the embodiment of why species survived or vanished. Instinct versus instinct. Evolution versus evolution. Breaking point stalemate couldn't last. Versek surged forward again. Overextending just slightly, a tiny mistake, almost imperceptible. But to a Deathworlder, almost was enough. Rhea caught his overextended arm, twisted under it, and drove her knee into the back of his joint. His roar of pain shook the walls as he dropped to one knee. And then she did something that froze the room. She stepped behind him, hooked her forearm around his throat, and locked her legs around his midsection, a rear chokehold, human style. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't pretty, but it was deadly. Versek thrashed, slamming her against the mat, clawing at her arms. But her grip held. Every second, the pressure built, his oxygen flow constricted, his strength waned. Submit. She hissed into his ear. Or this doesn't end with a broken arm. For a long, agonizing moment, the veteran warrior fought against the inevitable, and then, with a low, guttural growl, he tapped the floor. Predator meets Predator. Arena lights dimmed. The sparring field powered down with a soft hum. Rhea released her grip and stumbled backward, chest heaving, blood dripping steadily down her chin. Versek remained on one knee for a few seconds before rising slowly to his feet. His 3 functioning arms hung loose at his sides, his body marked with bruises and contusions that would take days to heal. He turned to face her and bowed, not mockingly, not begrudgingly or respectfully. "You are not prey," he said quietly. Rhea's chest still burned with every breath. "I never was." The overseer's voice rang out, crystalline and clear. Result: human cadet Rhea Alvarez, victorious. No one laughed this time. The silence was reverent, the kind given not to a student, but to a warrior. And from that moment on, the galaxy's deadliest academy would never look at humans the same way again. The news spread through Argath Prime Academy like wildfire, faster than any official announcement, faster even than the footage that would later circulate on military networks across half the sector. By nightfall, every cadet knew the story. The human girl broke Instructor Versek's arm. Then she made him yield. By the next morning, they weren't calling her weakling anymore. They were calling her Deathworlder. The new glance. Rhea Alvarez walked through the Academy's main concourse with her hood up, and her pace steady. But the atmosphere had changed, and she felt it with every step. It was in the hushed whispers that followed her down the polished obsidian halls. It was in the sudden silences when she entered a room. It was in the way training squads stopped mid-drill just to glance in her direction. Their faces a mix of curiosity, disbelief, and caution. The humans had always been a curiosity here. Now they were a variable, something that could no longer be dismissed, underestimated, or mocked. A pair of Zrillions taller, heavier, their scales shining under the hall lights, stepped aside as she approached. They didn't say a word, but their eyes avoided hers. On Earth, that might have been hostility. Here, it was respect, or maybe fear. Rhea wasn't sure how she felt about either. The mentors approached Cadet Alvarez. She stopped mid-stride, the familiar weight of that voice settling across her shoulders. Versek's tone no longer had the bored disdain it once did. Now, it was measured, deliberate, still commanding, but edged with something new: respect. He approached her slowly, his gait more restrained than usual. One arm still held in a regrowth sling. His crest was slightly lowered, a traditional gesture of acknowledgement among his people. Once, she might have thought it a trick. Now, she knew better. "Sir," she said, standing at attention, "you should not be on your feet," he said, eyeing the faint purple bloom on her cheek and the bruise spreading across her ribs. "Medbay recommended 3 days of rest." She shrugged. "Earth medicine says I'm fine." His nostrils flared slightly, a sign of amusement. She was starting to realize. Earth medicine also says drinking caffeine after midnight is healthy. It is. Spoken like a Deathworlder. There was a long pause. Then, to her surprise, Versek extended his upper right arm. a formal gesture of warrior-to-warrior greeting. It was not offered lightly. Rhea hesitated, then took it. "Your performance," he said, "was unexpected. That's one way to describe it." "I meant it as praise," he added, almost grudgingly. "I have trained soldiers from over 50 worlds. Most break before the first injury. They panic, they yield, they lose focus. You did none of those things. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. Most choose defeat." Rhea met his gaze. "Where I'm from, if you stop fighting, you die." That seemed to linger in the space between them. Versek nodded slowly. "Perhaps that is why Deathworlders endure." Lesson beyond the ring. Following weeks were different. Versek did not resume their sparring immediately. Instead, he began to meet her for doctrinal sessions, long, intense hours of discussion in the Academy's simulation chambers, dissecting not just the techniques of combat, but the philosophy behind them. Most species, he explained during one such session, evolved with natural weapons, claws, spines, venom, shells. You evolved with nothing. Hands, Rhea corrected. Hands, yes, but hands are tools, not weapons. You had to make the tools that let you kill, or survive. Exactly. He turned to face her, crest lowering slightly in respect. That is the lesson the galaxy forgets. Deathworlders are not strong because they were born strong. They are strong because they were born weak and learned to survive anyway. He showed her how the Karens used sheer bulk to dominate a battlefield. He taught her the Lyrian doctrine of fluid evasion, the mixed strategy of coordinated swarming. And in return, she showed him something the Academy had never taught. "How do you decide which joint to target first?" he asked one evening, reviewing footage of their match. "I don't decide," she said. "I feel for the weakness. Instinct does the math faster than thought. And if instinct is wrong, it usually isn't." Versek considered that, a slow, toothy grin spreading across his face. "I begin to see why your people terrify so many. A new reputation be the end of the cycle." Rhea's name was known far beyond the Academy. Fleet captains requested combat data from her sparring session. Tactical analysts dissected her movements frame by frame. Even the Galactic War Council quietly filed her performance under potential tactical variables. Human combat behavior. More importantly, cadets who had once dismissed her now sought her out. A mixed team asked if she would lead a mixed species exercise. Illyrian requested she demonstrate pressure point targeting. Even the arrogant Zrillian from her first day approached her in the mess hall, not to mock her, but to ask how humans endured so much pain without collapsing. Her answer was simple. "We never had the luxury of collapsing." The test of Aliasit was a month after the duel when the Academy announced a major exercise, a simulated combat mission involving all species. Teams would compete for tactical dominance, leadership, and cohesion. The highest-ranked team would be fast-tracked for special operations placement. To her surprise, Rhea wasn't assigned to a team. She was chosen to lead one. At first, the idea seemed ridiculous. A human commanding elite cadets from across the galaxy. But no one protested. Not after what they'd seen. The memory of Versek's broken arm and tap submission was still too fresh. She accepted the assignment. The mission, a simulated incursion on a fortified asteroid, was brutal. Her team was outnumbered, outgunned, and faced with unfamiliar terrain. But Rhea didn't fight the way the Academy taught. She fought the way Earth taught. She used misdirection instead of brute force. She turned enemy traps into ambush points. She baited stronger opponents into overextending, and then dismantled them piece by piece. The result was decisive. Her team won by a margin so large that even Thyre, who rarely showed emotion, glowed a deeper shade of violet in acknowledgement. The instructor's final words after the exercise. Versek found her once more, this time on the observation deck. Overlooking Argath Prime's red horizon. He stood silently beside her for a while, both of them watching the twin moons rise above the city's jagged spires. "You've changed this place," he said finally. "I didn't mean to. That's precisely why you did." He glanced at her, his tone softer than she'd ever heard. "Before you arrived, humans were considered soft, unfit for war. Now they are spoken of with caution." Rhea looked down at the scar on her knuckles, a faint, pale line from a street fight long before she ever left Earth. "I didn't come here to scare anyone. I came here to prove we belong. You have done more than that, Versek said. You have taught us something we forgot, that strength is not always born in the bone or the blood. Sometimes it is forged in suffering. He turned to leave, then paused. When you graduate, Cadet Alvarez, I hope to serve beside you. She smiled faintly. I hope you're ready to keep up. The Deathworlder Doctrine weeks later, as she stood in the center of the Academy auditorium receiving her combat insignia, the Overseer's voice echoed through the chamber. Cadet Rhea Alvarez, Earthborn, Deathworld class, passed. All evaluations with distinction. Applause thundered from the gathered crowd, not polite claps, but the sharp, resonant salute reserved for warriors. And in that moment, Rhea felt something deeper than pride. She felt acceptance. Humans had come to the stars as outcasts, as curiosities, soft and underestimated. But they had survived jungles, storms, predators, and extinction-level threats for millennia. They had risen not despite their fragility, but because of it. That was the Deathworlder doctrine. If the universe throws you into the fire, you don't burn. You become the fire. Rhea Alvarez looked out across the sea of alien faces, some respectful, some still uncertain, and smiled. They saw a human. She saw the future, and this was only the beginning.